Financing state and local government, challenges and choices in the post-pandemic era. Key takeaways. States entered a unique economic environment following the massive infusion of federal aid to states and individuals following the COVID-19 pandemic. Strong revenue collections coupled with the direct aid presented an economic landscape where states experienced their largest budget surpluses in 40 years. Reflexively, more than half of all states cut income tax rates beginning in 2021, just as inflation began to rise precipitously. Flush with cash and seeking to provide relief to individuals and businesses in the wake of the pandemic shutdowns and the surging pandemic-related inflation, states looked to cut income and property tax rates at an unprecedented rate. Many states chose to offset their revenue reductions with the modernization of sales tax designed to meet a transformed marketplace, thus keeping tax revenues high. Inflation began cooling in early 2024, and the economic outlook in most states remains quite strong, but the growth in surpluses came with the slowing of the revenue collections. State governments are expected to continue to reduce state and local tax rates for the time being, but risk future budget shortfalls with cuts in services. In keeping with universal and long-held standards for tax policy reform, legislatures will need to maintain their focus on the proper balance of equity, economic efficiency, simplicity, transparency, and administrability. The states being laboratories of democracy, hundreds of variations and approaches are found in the resources that are summarized in this policy brief. Tax liabilities are an important component of any strategy to attract new businesses and industries and to encourage economic expansion with the players on the field presently. States must not dismiss the importance of providing a quality education, health care, and safety for its citizens, as that creates the right environment for the right type of businesses. It had been 40 years since the U.S. experienced such spikes in inflation. Both the 1974 inflationary peak at 11% and the 1980 inflationary peak at 13.5% occurred midway through recessions that lasted nearly 2 years. It would be a full year after the end of the 2-month-long pandemic recession of March and April 2020 before we would see the peak of this latest inflationary cycle. The economy recovered from the pandemic recession much faster and with a ferocity even greater than the plow reached in May of 2020. This is a demonstration in chart form prepared by the Center of Budget and Policy Priorities, summarized information from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, where it indicates the end of the last recession by the trough of 2008 and 2009 there. And you can see how it extends all the way until the dip of the recession that almost immediately turned around and started rising. As we said, it was 2 months in duration. Chart 1.1 shows the 5-year average of all U.S. state governments combined, with the largest component of state government being tax revenue is the income tax at 45%. The second largest component of the state government tax revenue system is sales tax at 30%. Again, these are based on 5-year averages. This is chart 1.2, which shows the 5-year average of all U.S. local governments combined. The numbers reveal that the largest component of the combined government tax revenue, that's state and local government, is property tax, though only a tiny fraction, 30%, goes to the state. The second largest component of the combined government tax revenue in the states is income tax, but only 29% of that goes to the locals. Sales tax comprises nearly a quarter of the combined revenue of state and local governments, and it is the second largest source for both state and the local governments. This is a table that demonstrates the national totals of state government tax revenue by the type of tax. Labeled it Table 2, and what it does is demonstrates the the year over year for the first 2 quarters of 2022, 2023, and 2024. As indicated in the table above, a slight rebound from the reduction in revenues experienced in 2023 is recognized in this year-over-year analysis, but the levels for 2024 are still below those of 2022. This may be a consequence of the tax rate cuts for 2021 and 2022, and then the slower pace of recovery during 2023, but the specter of a return to higher rates of inflation should give the legislatures pause before enacting any more permanent and potentially damaging tax rate cuts, which will lead to budgetary cuts. The American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, or AICPA, Tax Policy Concept Statement 1. Tax policies should involve equity and fairness, should be similarly situated. Taxpayers should be taxed similarly. It should involve certainty in that the tax rules should clearly specify how the amount of payment is determined, when payment of the tax should occur, and how payment is made. It should involve the convenience of payment, where facilitation of a required tax payment at a time or in a manner that is most likely convenient for the taxpayer is important. It should involve effective tax administration, where the cost to collect the tax should be kept at a minimum for both the government and the taxpayer's sake. There should involve information security, with tax administration must protect the taxpayer information from all forms of unintended and improper disclosure. It should entail simplicity, with simple tax laws are necessary so the taxpayers understand the rules and can comply with them correctly and in a cost-efficient manner. Good tax policy involves neutrality, which means minimizing the effect of the tax law on the taxpayer's decisions as to how to carry out a particular transaction or whether to engage in a type of transaction is important. It should involve an economic growth and efficiency component. The tax system should not unduly impede or reduce the productive capacity of the economy. It should not drag the economy. It should involve transparency and visibility. Taxpayers should know that a tax exists and how and when it is imposed upon them and others. It should involve a minimum tax gap so that structuring tax laws will minimize the non-compliance, as that's an essential element to good tax policy. Accountability to taxpayers is another important feature of good tax policy. It would provide accessibility and visibility of information on tax laws, their development, modification, and the purpose that is necessary for the taxpayer to comply with. And lastly, it should involve an appropriate government revenue structure. Tax systems should have appropriate levels of predictability and reliability so that government can determine the timing and amount of tax collections with accuracy. Another reason, a slate of positions on what makes good tax policy good come from these 3 agencies. They involve a lot of the of the data that's presented in this policy brief. It's sourced from them. First, the U.S. Government Accountability Office, in its publication GAO 05-1009 SP, which is perhaps the most comprehensive discussion on what makes good tax policy good. They cite only 3 primary goals, although there's a great deal of information in support of what these are. And those are equity, economic efficiency, simplicity, transparency, and administrability, all in combination. The Tax Foundation provides a solid principles of sound tax policy also, in that they advise that it should entail simplicity, whereby the tax code should be easy for taxpayers to comply with and for governments to administer and enforce. It should involve transparency, where tax policy should clearly and plainly define what taxpayers must pay and when they must pay it. It must entail neutrality, in that the taxes should neither encourage nor discourage personal or business decisions, similar to, of course, to the AICPA standard. And it should involve stability, where taxpayers are in deserving need for consistency and predictability in their tax code. The fourth overview of the principles of what makes up good tax policy comes from the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy in their publication entitled Tax Principles, Building Blocks of a Sound Tax System. The characteristics that they encourage are equity, and they separate that into 2 types. The first being vertical equity, which involves the effects of any tax policy on families from low to high income spectrum in determining whether the tax is regressive, proportional, or progressive in nature. And those, all 3, have their place in tax systems, though some obviously are preferable to others. And it also involves the examination of horizontal equity, which evaluates the manner in which it applies to persons with similar characteristics, like similar income ranges, similar age, or retirees or children, and the structure of one's family, head of household, married, etc. It should entail a sense of adequacy, in that the tax policy should support a system that generates revenue adequate to meet the needs for government in its mission to match to public service demands. It should involve simplicity, in that the tax policy is easy for the taxpayer to understand and comply with, and for government to enforce. It should involve the principle of exportability, which ensures that non-residents that benefit from the government's public services, such as owners that live in an out-of-jurisdiction area, are required to contribute by payment of taxes to the state or local government from whence they receive those services. And lastly, the issue of neutrality, which again calls for avoidance of policies that create winners and losers, and refuse to promote one economic sector or one income earning type, 1099 versus 1040, etc., over another. Income tax. Recent income tax developments, as reported by the Tax Foundation. 44 states levy a corporate income tax as of this year, with 13 states imposing a top rate at or below 5%, and 4 states at 9% or above. 43 of the states in the District of Columbia levy an individual income tax, though New Hampshire and Washington only tax dividends and capital gains, respectively. 28 states in the District of Columbia that have individual income taxes utilize a graduated rate scale or a progressive rate scale, while 13 with now Louisiana becoming the last just this month, utilize a single or flat rate of income tax for their taxing system. Since 2021, 27 states have cut individual income tax rates, 13 states have cut corporate income tax rates, and 10 have cut both. Perspectives on state and local income tax from the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. In 35 states, low-income families are taxed at a higher rate than everyone else. In 10 states, those with the most regressive tax structures, they require the lowest 20% to pay 3 times as much of their income in taxes as the wealthiest 1%. And in 41 states, high-income families are taxed at lower rates than everyone else. All regressive in nature. Table 3, I offer as the state personal income tax rate changes starting in 2021. As you find any state and move across it, or again count the numbers of states that have induced rate cuts, many of them more than one in the same 4-year period, which is fairly unprecedented. Maybe the last time anything close to it was in the 1980s, and few times in our history have we seen so many income tax rate changes exercised by the state. The sources for this table were an article published by Catherine Lowhead of the Tax Foundation, titled State Tax Reform and Relief Trend Continues in 2023, which was published on June 8th of 2023, and supplemental information provided by the National Conference of State Legislatures in an article authored by Eric Severson and Andrea Jimenez entitled State Tax Actions 2024, which was published on November 12th of 2024. Property tax. Property values have soared over the last 5 years as inflation has driven up insurance rates, interest rates, and construction costs in an already low inventory economy. This makes note of the fact that inflation had genuinely begun even before the pandemic, though only slightly. Seeking to provide relief, multiple states have provided a series of rate cuts. Some states are considering eliminating property tax altogether. Property tax is the primary source of funding for local governments, who primarily provide funding for schools, most all funding, for their police and fire departments, for public health facilities and even privately run hospitals in their jurisdictions, and departments providing a myriad of services on behalf of the public. Some states have cut property tax rates while simultaneously expanding vouchers, creating potential cuts to services in the future. And by that, we're talking about cuts in funding for schools. I'm going to repeat that again in a minute. Local governments need flexibility in order to meet the needs of their constituents and are best positioned to make adjustments through credits, circuit breakers, which serve to cap increases when they reach a certain level, credits and rebates, some of which can be targeted to particular populations like the elderly, the unemployed, or families with children. Again, I'll remind you that some states have cut property tax rates while simultaneously expanding their voucher programs, creating potential for cuts in services in the future, and certainly involving potential cuts in education. Many of the states where this is happening, the education systems have already started being reduced. Government Finance Review, which is the bi-monthly membership magazine of the Government Finance Officers Association, in an article entitled Rethinking Property Taxes, offers some innovative ideas on improving property tax assessment valuations and tax design. It was authored by Shane Kavanaugh and Christopher Berry, and it entails improvements in not just how the evaluations are arrived at, which are most certainly due for modernization in many jurisdictions, but it also offers suggestions like setting a rate of tax that the local government wants to collect, like a certain amount of money, and then dividing that out over their inventory of taxable property sites in order to arrive at a system that's fair and transparent with the taxpayer. That's one of the biggest complaints the taxpayers have, is that they don't understand and they can't see the differences between what they pay in rates compared to what others pay in rates as in real justification. Tapping sales tax as an offset to property tax assessments results always in a more aggressive system. Sales tax, the last tax type. Large-scale tax reform began before COVID-19 as the disappearance of brick-and-mortar retail dealers, manufacturers, video rental companies, photography studios, etc., gave way to internet-based purveyors. The Supreme Court of the United States decision in South Dakota versus Wayfair of 2018 removed the state prohibition against collecting sales tax on internet sales, which had been imposed by the Supreme Court in a previous decision on the basis of interruption of interstate commerce. But that was removed in 2018 in this landmark decision. Recent efforts to impose a sales tax on digital goods that would entail telecommunications, cell phone apps, music, movie file purchases and rentals, computer software, and who knows what else will be available to us on digital goods in the near future. The effort to collect those taxes has become more successful as more and more states sign on to it. This is another primary feature of the Tax Foundation's cookie cutter approach to states collecting sales tax from a broader base of personal consumption, not business consumption. The new revenue sources make offsetting income and property tax with sales taxes popular. Under models proliferating in every region of the country, that Tax Foundation model to broaden the base of taxable goods and services is being considered and adopted as a means of adapting to our new marketplaces, where personal services are rapidly replacing purchases of tangible personal property. As an example, many people hire someone to cut their lawn now, whereas they used to go buy a lawnmower. That's the type of transformation that we're undergoing, and it is a far cry different from the beginning of sales taxes, which were right after the Great Depression in the 1930s, where almost everything was tangible personal property. Along with the expansion of the base of taxable goods, the Tax Foundation is successfully convincing legislatures to expand the definition of business inputs so as not to add a liability to manufacturers and other corporations. This is a point that they press hard in their lobbying efforts, as it it ultimately allows businesses to pay nothing by way of sales taxes, even on items that they consume. For an example, a copy machine, even though the tax foundation takes the position that such purchases are necessary to the production model. Like property tax to a degree, the new sales tax regimes allow state and local governments to capture revenues under the principle of exportability, wherein business owners from out of state are subject to the imposition of tax in a way they weren't previously employed, since in a sense their businesses are gaining the benefit of local services. They now have to put skin in the game through taxes that they weren't previously reached by. As a reminder, tapping sales tax as an offset to property tax assessments results in a more regressive system. So remedies like excluding personal use products, baby products, things like that, removes some of its regressivity on the people that are at the bottom of the income scale. That concludes this presentation. I hope you will read the brief in its entirety, and thank you for listening.